I'm David Hunt and welcome to The Art Hunter. My guest today, she's got a PhD and she thinks she's so important because of it. She's an award-winning author, of course she is, with a PhD. Her writing is about places and people, tracing the history of community, which I think is a wonderful thing. The first reader finds a wonderful insight to what she's writing about, which I found really interesting when I've read her books. She has written so many books that she had to move house to fit all the books into the new house. And then I hear that she threw them all out.
Because none of them sold, so they're all in my house.
Shut up, you're not on yet. And she has also written her own one-woman shows, multiple ones. La Mama, hello, again, PhD, author, writing, too many things. She's done too many things. Featured articles, essays, and of course she's been on many writing committees. We're talking about pen. What's pen? Yeah, that's what you write with. But what does pen stand for in her world? Presently working on a film about Bohemia, St Kilda. And there is another book in the works as well. Judith, hello.
Hi, David. How are you? I think I should just leave now.
Why?
Well, you said it all.
Said it all. Selling your house and buy. No, I made that up. You don't know anything about that.
I have got friends who have too many copies of their own books and their laundries are full of their books, and so it's not that unusual.
Yeah. So when did the writing all start for you?
The writing started really when I did a drama and media studies degree at Rusden College back in the old days.
I don't even know where that is.
And it used to be Monash Teachers College, then it stopped being a teachers college and became a state college, and then for a while it was free under the Gough Whitlam scheme, and you could go there and not become a teacher but just do drama and media studies. So I began really writing then, and I was writing my own one-woman shows and two-woman shows. And that started, so it was 1974 that I was at Rusden, that I started doing that sort of work. And I was writing things for their magazine.
Oh, okay.
So there was a student magazine, and I was always writing these very rebellious, very left-wing, it was just past the Vietnam days.
Oh, okay.
So, it was full of feminist...
and you had a cigarette out and you were madly typing.
That's right. And we all smoked like mad in those days.
Well, you shouldn't have. You were a naughty girl.
Well, I stopped.
Good.
I stopped. Anyway, so I started writing for, I guess, for my one-woman shows and these little pieces.
And how did you enjoy performing them? Did you
It was
love it?
It was hell.
Why?
Well, because, look, it's one thing to perform someone else's work.
Yeah.
But, oh my God, there you are on stage, and not only are you performing, but you've written this bloody stuff.
So therefore it was crap, was it?
Well, yeah, and if it doesn't work, oh my God. So, of course, we were on at La Mama, and in those days, La Mama was a much less organised place. Like, everything was much less organised in those days. And so we were always ready, we designed it and we had slides and we had all kinds of things. But some nights it was fantastic and some nights it wasn't.
Yep.
And it was really so hit and miss, and you'd go afterwards and you think, well, why didn't it work tonight?
But isn't that what theatre's about?
Well, that's what theatre's about,
yeah.
But it killed me in the end. And so by the time I was coming to do my fourth one, I thought, no, I'm not performing it. So I have a friend called Bev Geldard, who's a beautiful actor, and she lives in Castlemaine now. And I said, look, Bev, I will write this and you perform it by yourself. And so that was 1986, my last one.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
PhD, why?
Well, the PhD happened. Then in 87, I went overseas and lived for 3 years in Budapest. I was in Budapest during the end of the Cold War.
Whoa.
When the Berlin Wall came down, and I was actually working as a sort of editor for an English language daily paper.
Oh, okay.
It was a communist paper.
Yeah.
And so I was actually, when all the news came about the Berlin Wall, there I was working for a newspaper. And so I came back from, and I'd been writing a lot of articles about, there was no internet, So every article that I sent back from Budapest to Melbourne, whether it was in the Age Monthly Review or various other, publications, everything I wrote was published because, of course, the feeling was in the air that something momentous was about to happen. And even though I was writing about the arts and mostly just talking about galleries or theatre or whatever, you could feel that, And so those 3 years that I spent in Hungary were fantastic, and I had my daughter there, and then I came back. And then the way that the books happened was that, first of all, I was looking for something to do originally as a master's at university, and then it became a PhD. I was friends with George Turner, who was a very important science fiction writer in Australia, and he won the Arthur C. Clarke Prize. He won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. So, he was really an important... And I'd met him at a science fiction writers' workshop that he was leading, that I attended. And so I was working on a master's about him, and my supervisor at Melbourne University said, "This is a biography. You should do a PhD."
Oh.
So I went, "Oh my God, the longest thing I'd ever written until then was about 3,000 words, and PhD's 80,000 words." I went, "Oh, can I go home and think about it?" So I just ended up doing a biography of George Turner, which Melbourne University Press then published.
Wow.
And that book is in 140 libraries around the world.
Congratulations.
Which I just, now you can find these things out. The world is such an extraordinary place.
So
now.
do you walk into those libraries around the world and say, "Excuse me, I want to see my book"?
I never go into any libraries around the world. I just look up their catalogue. And the first book that I wrote about Melbourne was about St Kilda Road, and that also was really just a sort of fluke. I was standing on the corner of Louise Street and St Kilda Road with a friend of mine, and I'd gone to Macrob, so I'd been up and down on the tram, up and down St Kilda Road, all through the 60s, and I loved it. And I said to her, "Someone should write a book about this street." And she said, "Well, why don't you?" And so literally it began there, and I sort of again went, "Oh, really?" And then I thought, oh. And that was when I first came across Jude Munro again, who ended up commissioning me to write the Pride Centre history, was that I had begun to do that work, and I thought, what am I doing here? And someone said to me, "Oh, go and see the CEO of the City of St Kilda, because she'll be able to help you, get the whole project up." And I said, "Really?" Anyway, so I went to see the CEO, and it was Jude Munro, who I'd been at Macrob with. So we threw our arms around each other and went, "Oh my God." And she was marvellous. We held an exhibition of all the research that we'd done. She got me in touch with the St Kilda Road Precinct Group, who helped us financially. And so it really just was extraordinary. And that was the first book of mine that was published. We had the launch at Government House.
Whoa.
But it was really like you could have pushed me. It was just such a surprise.
Yeah.
I can't tell you.
Lovely.
So, that was how the writing life began. And Penn also I got involved with because I'd been overseas and come back. And Tom Shapcott, who was, I think, the treasurer of Penn in Melbourne.
Describe to our viewers, what is Penn?
Okay, so Penn is the now more than 100-year-old organisation of writers in the world. It's an international writers' organisation. Their main task these days is to try and get writers who have been imprisoned for their writing out of prison. So that's one of the big things that we were always doing.
Yeah.
And they had a women writers committee, so eventually I became the president of Melbourne Penn Centre, which Tom Shapcott got me involved with. And then I don't quite understand how that happened either, but they asked me if I would chair the Women Writers Committee of Penn in the world.
Wow.
So from 2003 to 2009, I was travelling overseas twice a year. We went to West Africa, we went to Central Asia,
How
we
wonderful.
went to all these, where I was organising women writers sort of meetings, and it was just marvellous. And we published a newsletter that came out 2 or 3 times a year in 3 languages.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was really the most fantastic and intense time.
And then they kicked you out?
No, you can only do two lots of 3 years.
I'm joking.
It's great. I really wish every organisation would only let people do 2 lots of 3 years as president.
Good point.
It's really very good politically to not have someone grasp something and then not let go of it.
And do you that would have opened the door for a lot more committees as well, which you've been on a lot.
Well, no. Then, because I was working on books about Melbourne all the time, the Param Mechanics Institute Victorian History Library was where I was doing a lot of my research and writing. And they asked me if I would like to be on the committee, and I did, and then I became the president of that. But I've tried not to be, you know, because then you're not working. You know, you're spending all your time on committees.
So how does the inspiration come from a book, or do people approach you about books?
I was very lucky, I think. After I wrote The History of St Kilda Road, I was approached almost immediately by the Montefiore Homes in St Kilda Road, who wanted their 150th anniversary.
Oh, who are they?
So the Montefiore Homes is a Jewish welfare organisation, and they began as the Jewish Philanthropic Society, started before the gold rush.
Oh, wow.
And then they built a series of little sort of houses in St Kilda Road, where the Montefiore Home still is, that was supposed to be for people in need or elderly people. And then that just kind of grew up into this organisation that helped elderly Jewish people.
Yeah, and it's huge now,
it's
isn't
huge
it?
now.
And it goes
Absolutely.
over into Punt Road as well.
Not to Punt Road, no.
Oh.
That's
almost,
yeah. But
she gets me on a technicality.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, so I just couldn't believe it. You know, they contacted me, and I went, oh, all right. Well, thank goodness I did that, because, you know, I found their 150-year-old minute books thrown into the bottom of a cupboard, and I mean, you know, after that I started getting very thin about how people kept their papers. But I had a wonderful time researching that. And really after that, I was very lucky. I was just,
what is it about research? You know, like, because it can be really exciting and stimulating, because you're unearthing bits of history.
That's right. And especially, you know, if you're living in the place that you're researching, then you're walking around the streets and you're meeting people whose, you know, parents or grandparents or antecedents were involved in events. You're talking to a lot of different people, and, you know, you're doing research in the State Library or the Public Record Office, and these extraordinary newspaper articles. I mean, it's just delicious, really. And photographs, the whole.
But how hard was it, Judith, back then? Because before the internet, you know, like, so therefore you would have. Where did you go? What did you do?
Initially, the St Kilda Road book, it was very funny actually. In those days, most of it was in the State Library. Some of it was at the Public Record Office and the National Trust, but the State Library's picture collection people, they really felt they owned those photographs.
So they were a bit.
So it was like, you know, when you had to make an appointment to go and have a look, you had to make an appointment, you had to say exactly in the catalogue what it was that you wanted to see, and then they sort of hovered over you to make sure that, I don't know what I was going to do, maybe put my fingerprints on the photos. And then, you know, you had to ask to have it, you know, reproduced. So it was a whole sort of thing. But in a way, I quite enjoyed it, you know, because now everything is digitised.
Yeah.
So, of course, I don't have to do all that.
Yeah.
And I can remember there was the Australian Studies Centre. We did, the photographer who I worked with, and I did some research for St Kilda Road in there. And every person who worked there had a funny voice. So we went, shall we go to the Department of Funny Voices today? And we just, you know, so we got to know a lot. You get to know a lot of people, both who are working in institutions or St Kilda Road brought so many people out. We had a meeting. We put an ad in the local paper saying we wanted to meet anyone who'd lived there or worked there. And it was wonderful. All the people turned up and they had scrapbooks and So in a way, it was great, and that's still great. I still love meeting all the people and interviewing them and doing all that.
And you seem to do a lot in this neck of the woods, don't you? You know, like over your shoulder is Acland Street and Greville Street and the Pride Centre.
I don't do anything on the other side of town. People have asked me, and I go, no, no, I'm not going over the other side of the river.
The dark side, but. Acland Street. Let's talk about Acland Street, because what incredible history that. Because I'm not from Melbourne. I'm an Adelaide boy, and you know, there was always the cake shops when you came to Acland Street, and of course a lot of them have gone now because you know like the people have moved, no longer there.
Yeah.
But the history there and the Jewish history was just extraordinary, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't realise that I knew that the St Kilda synagogue had been there for a long time. And so there's kind of two Jewish communities in St Kilda, one that was there in the 19th century and many of whom were quite well off and important people in government. But there was always a poor lot of, you know, they weren't all wealthy. And then there's the people who arrived in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, after, you know, before and after the war because of the Holocaust. But St Kilda, I didn't like, this is something that I found out only recently. There was a point in the 1880s when Melbourne was the richest city in the world. And St Kilda was the richest part of Melbourne per capita. So St Kilda was the richest place in the world for about 10 years. And that was a result of the gold rush, of course.
Yeah, but you can see that in the architecture, can't you? You know, like even a lot of the apartment blocks are beautiful.
Art Deco.
You know,
Well, we had, and this was the other thing that happened here. I think because St Kilda was always such a mixture of fun and, you know, Luna Park, all those things, and the beach, and then you had wealthy people moving in because the area in Melbourne, we didn't have sewage till 1900. We had 500,000 people living in Melbourne with no sewage, you know. Really and truly, you can remember the stink was incredible. And so people started moving out of the city quite early if they could. And yes, St Kilda was one of the first places that they came to.
And the beach. You know,
the
like
beach was
people
here,
were coming
absolutely.
to the beach.
So we always had this mixture of kind of very wealthy and important and whatever, and people who just wanted to have fun.
And of course then it became a very arty part of the world as well.
That's right.
And still
and
is
for the
to
same
this day.
reason. You know, that it was the combination of having fun, and then you had a lot of hotels and rooming houses that were originally holiday places, but that became permanent residences for people who didn't want to live with their family, who were perhaps gay and didn't want to, you know, wanted to have some privacy, wanted to live a different life than most people. And a lot of those people were involved in the arts, of course. So you have this incredible mixture of, and then you also had Squizzy Taylor and, you know, the gangsters, and the gangsters hung out with the art. Village Bell was a place where the artists and the gangsters hung out together.
So it was very European in so many ways, wasn't it?
That's
right. Exactly what would have been going on in Paris and Berlin.
That's exactly. And so you have this fantastic, vibrant life. And St Kilda was also one of the most closely populated suburbs in Melbourne. I mean, I think there was a period after the war when they did, the council did a survey and they found that there was one single room available in the whole of St Kilda for rent. It was just, and by then all the mansions had become boarding houses. Plus you had, you know, the flats initially were very posh. They were not for, you know, it was the boarding houses that was full of, you know, ordinary people. Because the Art Deco flats, they had tiny little kitchen, because often they even had like a sort of big kitchen downstairs where food was cooked and you could have your lunch delivered.
Oh, wow.
You know, there was incredible. So it was a very different flat life was very different to what it is now, although it was still not very respectable in some ways.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, there are all the prostitutes. And
Well, that's right,
as you
that's
mentioned,
right.
the gay world,
That's right,
the
that's
Prince
right.
of Wales,
Yeah,
pokies there,
absolutely,
legendary.
absolutely.
But then all of a sudden you move over, not very far away, to Greville Street. And the Greville Street's had a wonderful history.
Greville Street was
over in Paran,
That's
for those
right.
that don't
And
know.
that's kind of really been forgotten, because at least here in St Kilda,
Yes.
everything, no matter how bad things get and people say, oh, it's not like it used to be, there's still, if you come down to Fitzroy Street on a Saturday night, my God, there's still thousands of people,
Yep,
you know.
yep.
The rest of Melbourne suburbs come to St Kilda to
Yep,
have fun.
yep.
You know, so Greville Street is not like
No,
that. Greville
no.
Street had a kind of, it was very important because it had the town hall, the police station, the courthouse. Everything was in Greville Street, plus it had the railway station. So it was, in a way, easy to create something
Yep.
there. And so, you know, then they had a couple of really important dance halls in Greville Street. And then in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the counterculture moved in to all those fantastic little shops where you could, you know, make your own clothes and sell them
Yep.
and live above the shop. And
Yep.
it all cost like next to nothing.
And Greville Records, the
Greville
record
Records
store,
still there. Bless their hearts.
Yeah.
Thank goodness they're still there.
And that's the wonderful thing about it. But yes, it has moved a lot.
Well, it's really quite sort of sad now. You know,
Yeah.
when the library moved around the corner, I thought, we've got to do this book. And I said to the Paran Mechanics Institute Library, I said, please will you publish? I want to write a book about Greville Street. And I'd been at Monash University. So Monash University was the place where at one stage in 1969, when I started university, The Age had this article and it said, if the revolution is going to start in Australia, it will be starting at Melbourne, and specifically it will be starting at Monash University. And Monash University had their urban headquarters in Greville Street at the bakery.
Right, okay.
And I remembered being there, you
Yeah.
know, Albert Langer, all those people, you know, I'd been part of that little enclave. And so I just thought, that's how Greville Street, being what it was that the bakery, the Labor Club was there. And so all these really left-wing organisations, and then eventually it ended up being the AIDS Council
Yep.
and the marijuana
Party.
whatever.
Yeah.
They all moved into Greville Street.
Yeah.
And it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And you could buy these one-off, beautiful clothes that someone had designed and made
Yeah.
for very little money. So it was this wonderful, you know, array of things. And, all these things, I'm so lucky. Like, I was part of all those things.
Yep. And people would have been coming to you as well. But let's move a little bit, further closer to the city. The Yarra, you've got a little bit of an obsession with the Yarra,
I've got an
haven't you?
obsession with the Yarra River now, because when I was doing the history of Collins Street, when I was doing the history of St Kilda Road, and certainly when I was doing the history of the Port of Melbourne, I realised that there wasn't a book about the Yarra River. I mean, there's been, some smaller books written about just, the kind of fun of the Yarra in the city, or the natural history of parts of the Yarra, which is just the natural history. But there is no book that you can go to, and that was what I was always searching for. Even with Greville Street, because there'd been an Aboriginal protectorate on the river, but it had been a large block of land that was actually down to about where High Street is now. So I wrote about that in the Greville Street book, and I thought, but I've had to find all this myself,
Well, that's what research
and that's
is
what
all
research
about.
is. But I thought, for someone who really wants to understand Melbourne, because it's our lifeblood, it still is our lifeblood. The river provides us with our water, even now, So I think people think that the Yarra is this bit of dirty water in the middle of the city that, you might go up to Warrandyte and have a swim there or something, or know about the Heidelberg School of Painters. But really, people don't understand what the river is and and that we exist only because the river is here.
But the fact is that now because of South Bank, it's really opened.
That's right.
And the fact is that all of a sudden, where South Bank is, the amount of people that live there now,
is huge.
crossing the river daily.
That's right.
And the art centres there.
Well, I think it began with the Arts Centre, really. When they decided to build the Arts Centre there, which was in the 60s, the gallery opened in the 60s, and then the rest of it, in the 70s and 80s, that really changed the whole feeling.
Yes.
Before that, it was kind of not very pleasant. You wouldn't want to be going
But
near
a lot
the
of
river.
factories and whatever were there, weren't there?
That's right.
And the fact is that, I moved here almost 40 years ago, and I only thought when I was on a tram crossing the river the other day, wow, the skyline
it's
is
incredible, isn't it?
So huge.
I can't believe it either, especially on the south side of the river.
Yep.
That all these huge buildings. Even 10 years ago, they weren't there.
And of course, what comes with that is all the cafes and restaurants along the Yarra.
And that's why there are not so many cafes and restaurants that are working in Acland Street anymore. I think people say to me, Acland Street. Well, you can go to your own little suburban shopping centre now and have a fantastic coffee, and there's probably even a restaurant there, whereas once upon a time, to go to a restaurant, you had to go either to Lygon Street or to Acland Street. There just weren't that many places. It's really, the world has really changed. And on Sunday in the city, you could lie down in the middle of Collins Street and not get run over. Honestly, it was like dead as a doornail. It was extraordinary.
But now it's a different world.
It's like,
the city is just manic on weekends. Everyone's coming in to check it out. But then again, so is St Kilda in summer. St Kilda in summer is really busy. So, you're writing this book now. Well, it's finished.
Well, it's finished,
and hopefully it will be out
And it's
soon.
the whole of the river,
right,
all the way up to the Yarra Ranges, where the source of the water is.
Okay.
And it also goes back to before European settlement. So when the Wurundjeri lived on the river, and still live on the river now, but when that was their place. So I've really done the whole river for
How long did it take you, Judith?
5 years on and off. So in between, I wrote a history of women's rowing in Australia and a book about the Pride Centre in St Kilda. So, it was interrupted, but I kept coming back. There were times when I thought, oh my God, I'm just never going to finish this book. I just don't, But then I'd always come back to it. There was something that just drew me back to it.
So, you've got the book on the Yarra coming. Now you're working on a film.
Yeah, which I've never done before.
It's a doco, is it?
Well, it's going to be a documentary about creative St Kilda, really. So it's about, the artists and the writers and their kind of, bohemia in the sense of, all the hangers off, who were involved with creatives. And that's huge in St Kilda because Sidney Nolan lived in St Kilda. So, it's not just the last 5 minutes or something.
No.
It's really from the 19th century to today.
But the fact is, I live in St Kilda, and the amount of people that you see on the street and you think, I know who they are. I know who they are, or I've met them along the way. But the average person would have no idea who they're walking with down the street in St Kilda. It's still very much the arts precinct, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's just been made, a music precinct now. So that's fantastic. That people will be able to, that dreadful kind of conflict between people who don't want the music near them, but they live next to the Prince of Wales Hotel.
Well,
You think, why are you living next to the Prince of Wales Hotel?
Exactly.
So it's still really a booming. And I think even the fact that the Pride Centre is here is definitely a symptom of that creative kind of
And so much
atmosphere.
is coming out of there on a creative
Absolutely,
level.
it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And that it's a venue itself.
Yeah. Well, can't wait to see this Yarra River book and the doco and whatever else you get involved in. I'm sure there's 105 other books yet, and you might have to move house again. Which you've never moved house anyway. Judith, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you so much.
I'm David Hunt. You'll be watching The Art Hunter, and we'll be back again next week. Almost 100 shows. Almost. See ya.